Ladies and gentlemen, meet the Easter Bunny. You really want to?
Yes, I do.
Okay, what do you want to sing for us?
Well, if I told you what it was, you'd probably say...
In 1969, a single unaired TV episode sent shockwaves through American media, silencing one of the most popular shows on air. Without warning, without explanation, what could be so controversial that CBS pulled the plug overnight? This is the untold story of how two brothers turned a comedy hour into a cultural battleground, challenged the system, and paid the price. What was on that forbidden tape, and why does it still matter today?
I was up in Toronto last night at the invitation of CTV Network for two reasons. One, to show the show and get the reaction of the people there, because the show in question was considered by CBS.
A tape arrived at CBS. It wasn't unusual for tapes to come through, especially ahead of a scheduled broadcast. But this one sent alarm bells ringing almost instantly. It didn't contain the usual mix of light-hearted sketches and musical performances that viewers had come to expect. Instead, what appeared on screen was a sharp, unapologetic political message, one that was far bolder than anything the network had previously allowed to air. Here, in a matter of minutes, the familiar hallways of CBS turned tense. Within 6 days, the Smothers Brothers comedy hour was cancelled without any official explanation. No press conference, no farewell episode, just a sudden silence. Although the tape never aired in the United States, its impact rippled across the television industry, sparking a new wave of debate around free speech, censorship, and the responsibilities of broadcasters. To understand the full weight of what happened, it's important to step back and look at the broader context of American television in the 1960s. At that time, 3 major networks controlled nearly everything that appeared on TV: NBC, ABC, and CBS. These networks weren't just gatekeepers of entertainment, they were also, in many ways, guardians of social norms. The programming they produced reflected the values of post-war America: stability, traditional family structures, patriotism, and a sense of moral clarity. Shows were carefully scripted and heavily edited to align with what was considered acceptable. Controversial topics were avoided. Politics, if addressed at all, was generally wrapped in humour or handled with extreme caution. CBS in particular had carved out a dominant position. It aired popular family-friendly shows like Bonanza, The Ed Sullivan Show, and Gunsmoke. These were safe bets, programs that appealed to a wide audience without ever challenging their worldviews. The formula worked for a time, drawing in millions of viewers each night and helping CBS stay comfortably ahead in the ratings game. But as the decade progressed, the world outside television began to shift dramatically. The Vietnam War escalated, the civil rights movement gained ground, and the youth-led counterculture began to challenge the status quo. Music, art, and public discourse were changing. What had once felt stable now felt restrictive. Young people were questioning authority, protesting wars, and demanding change. Suddenly, the kind of content that dominated television started to feel out of touch with reality, particularly to younger audiences. This growing gap between the world on screen and the world outside it presented a challenge for networks. CBS, like its competitors, had to figure out how to stay relevant. That's where the Smothers Brothers came in. Tom and Dick Smothers weren't complete newcomers. They'd built a modest following through smaller appearances, often playing up a smart brother/dumb brother routine that balanced wit with a certain light-hearted charm. Their humour felt harmless, and CBS saw them as a potential solution to its Sunday night problem. NBC's Bonanza was dominating that primetime slot, and the network needed a way to compete. So they took a chance and launched the Smothers Brothers Comedy Hour in February 1967. At first glance, the show was familiar. It followed a variety format with musical performances, comedic sketches, and playful banter between the brothers. The first few episodes kept to this script, offering a mix of entertainment that didn't seem likely to rock the boat. Behind the scenes, though, Tom Smothers had something else in mind. While CBS was focused on ratings, he was thinking about how to use the show as a platform. one that could reflect the concerns of the younger generation and introduce more meaningful conversations into the mainstream. Tom began gradually weaving in sharper commentary and socially conscious themes. These additions weren't always overt. Sometimes they came in the form of offhand jokes, and other times through carefully chosen guest performers. But they were there, and they began to build. Dick Smothers didn't resist the changes, though he often played the role of moderator, tempering Tom's more pointed remarks and maintaining the balance that kept the show accessible to a wide audience. As the show progressed through its first season, the shift became noticeable. The brothers welcomed guests who represented the growing counterculture, including anti-war folk singer Pete Seeger, who had previously been blacklisted from television due to his political activism. Seeger's appearance on the show, singing a song that referenced the Vietnam War, marked a turning point. Soon after, other notable guests followed. Harry Belafonte, Joan Baez, Jefferson Airplane, and The Who. These weren't just musicians, they were symbols of a larger cultural movement, and the songs they performed weren't just entertainment, they were statements. In addition to music, the Smothers Brothers also started hiring younger writers with a more political edge. Among them were future icons like Steve Martin and Mason Williams. The comedy sketches evolved from playful routines into sharp satirical segments. Humorous folk songs gave way to fictional debates about real issues like war, religion, and civil liberties. The show still looked like a variety show on the surface, but what it was saying had changed dramatically. Despite the shift in content, or perhaps because of it, the show's popularity began to grow. Young viewers, particularly those between 18 and 25, tuned in week after week. On college campuses, the show became something of a cult favorite. Students repeated lines from the show, analyzed its content in campus newspapers, and treated it as a rare example of television actually speaking to their generation. Meanwhile, some parents and conservative viewers, especially in the southern United States, were less enthusiastic. CBS began receiving letters of complaint. Some local affiliates warned that they might stop airing the program if its content continued in the same direction. CBS now found itself in a tricky position. On the one hand, the show was performing well in terms of ratings, which meant advertising revenue and market share. On the other hand, its content was becoming increasingly difficult to manage, and the network's executives were starting to feel like they had less and less control. Tom Smothers, for his part, refused to compromise. When he felt that a line or performance was essential to the show's message, he wouldn't cut it, even when CBS asked him to. Episodes were frequently edited at the last minute or delivered behind schedule, complicating the network's standard review process. Still, the show stayed on the air, viewership was strong, the cultural relevance was undeniable, and there was no other program quite like it. By the start of its second season, it was clear that the Smothers Brothers Comedy Hour had evolved into something bigger than a variety show. It had become a weekly forum for social commentary, satire, and countercultural expression, something that had never existed before in American primetime television. What makes this transformation all the more remarkable is that it wasn't the result of a single bold decision by CBS or the show's creators. It happened gradually, almost organically, as the national mood shifted and the Smothers Brothers responded in real time. The show didn't start as a radical political statement, but it became one. And as it grew in influence, it started to expose the limitations of what networks were willing to tolerate, even in the face of strong audience support. This tension between creative expression and corporate control would ultimately lead to the show's downfall. But during that first phase, before things boiled over, the Smothers Brothers Comedy Hour managed to do something extraordinary. It bridged the gap between entertainment and activism in a way that was both accessible and meaningful, reminding audiences that television didn't have to shy away from reality, it could reflect it. And for a moment, it did. As the Smothers Brothers Comedy Hour moved into its second season, the tension between the creative team and CBS became more visible. What had started as a variety show was now being viewed by many as a political program disguised as entertainment. While the ratings were still solid and the show maintained its appeal with younger audiences, the gap between what the show wanted to say and what the network was willing to tolerate continued to widen. The initial charm of Tom and Dick's comedic dynamic was still present, but the content had matured and taken on a sharper tone. Each new episode seemed to press a little harder against the invisible boundaries set by the network. The audience was now clearly split. On college campuses across the country, students saw the show as a breath of fresh air. It was one of the few programs on television that reflected their values, frustrations, and questions about the world around them. They laughed at the satire, sang along with the protest songs, and repeated lines from the show as if they were rallying cries. Campus newspapers regularly published opinion pieces praising the Smothers brothers for being brave enough to push back against political and cultural conservatism. But the show's growing influence among young people wasn't received well by everyone. Many older viewers, especially in conservative parts of the country, saw the content as disruptive or even dangerous. CBS began receiving an increasing number of letters from concerned parents, religious groups, and local station managers. The complaints focused on the show's perceived disrespect for authority, its political leanings, and what some described as anti-American sentiment. Although CBS executives were not new to receiving public feedback, the intensity and frequency of the complaints around this show were higher than usual. Still, CBS hesitated to act. From a business point of view, the show was performing well. Advertisers were still interested, and ratings were strong, especially among younger viewers, a demographic that was becoming increasingly valuable. Internally, though, the discomfort was building. Executives started to question how much longer they could allow the show to continue its trajectory without facing consequences, either from viewers, sponsors, or even political figures. Meanwhile, Tom Smothers grew bolder. He believed that the platform they had built came with a responsibility. As long as people were tuning in, he saw an opportunity to challenge the status quo and encourage critical thinking through humour and music. He didn't view this as activism in the traditional sense, but rather as an honest reflection of the times. The world outside was changing rapidly, and he didn't think television should pretend otherwise. Dick Smothers, while not opposed to his brother's intentions, found himself playing the role of peacekeeper. He understood the risks they were taking and the fragile relationship with CBS. Often he would push Tom to compromise or find middle ground, not because he disagreed with the message, but because he feared the whole show would collapse under the weight of its ambitions. Their dynamic on screen mirrored their roles behind the scenes, Tom the passionate idealist and Dick the cautious realist. The guest lineup continued to reflect the show's evolving tone. Jefferson Airplane performed songs that hinted at drug use and countercultural rebellion. The Who delivered such an explosive performance of My Generation that they damaged the sound system on set. Joan Baez stirred controversy by singing a song dedicated to her husband, who was in prison for resisting the draft. CBS cut the explanation from the final broadcast, but the meaning wasn't lost on viewers. Each of these moments added to the show's reputation as a lightning rod for cultural change. In addition to musical performances, the writing team began pushing further into satirical and political territory. One of the most notable contributors was Pat Paulson, who had been hired specifically to deliver mock editorials. His segments parodied the tone and structure of political speeches, but carried biting commentary on real policies. He would propose absurd solutions to serious issues, such as building more potholes to test the patience of voters, or solving crime by ignoring it until it went away. The humour was dry and absurd, but it struck a nerve. Paulson even announced a fake presidential campaign, and to CBS's surprise, some viewers treated it seriously, writing letters of support or outrage. This kind of satire embarrassed politicians, not because it was offensive, but because it held up a mirror to the public's frustrations. It mocked the predictable language of political campaigns, the empty promises and the bureaucratic systems that seemed unresponsive to everyday people. What worried CBS wasn't just the content, but the way audiences were responding to it. The jokes weren't just jokes, they were becoming rallying points. The biggest source of conflict, however, came in the form of comedian David Steinberg. His segments, known as sermonettes, were particularly controversial. Styled like mini-sermons, Steinberg would take religious figures or stories and reframe them in modern political contexts. He wasn't mocking religion directly, but using its language and symbols to question power, conformity, and hypocrisy. For some viewers, especially in more conservative areas, this was too much. One of Steinberg's sketches in late 1968 was met with such intense backlash that several CBS affiliates refused to air it. The network received over 300 complaints in 1 week. CBS executives saw this as a clear sign that they were losing control of the show's direction. Despite the backlash, many younger viewers embraced the segment. Some students even copied down parts of the monologue in notebooks. Others passed around recordings, creating a kind of underground circulation for banned content. CBS responded by tightening its oversight. The network imposed stricter censorship guidelines and required that each episode be submitted at least 10 days in advance for review. This was meant to give the censors time to request edits or cut segments entirely. But Tom Smothers often ignored these deadlines. He deliberately submitted episodes late, knowing that it would be harder for CBS to make changes once airtime approached. Sometimes, entire scenes were edited just minutes before broadcast. It was a risky game, and it pushed the already tense relationship to the breaking point. Behind closed doors, CBS executives began holding regular meetings to discuss what to do about the show. While there was no public announcement, it was clear that the network was preparing for a possible cancellation. Affiliates in the South were threatening to drop the program altogether. Some sponsors were expressing concerns about being associated with political content. The pressure was growing from every direction. Within the production team, the mood also shifted. Writers and performers started to worry about the show's future. Some advocated for a more moderate approach, fearing that the entire project could be lost if they pushed too hard. Others, like Tom, felt that they had already crossed the point of no return. If they were going to be taken off the air, they might as well make every episode count. Dick Smothers found himself increasingly caught in the middle. His loyalty to his brother was unwavering, but he also wanted to protect the show and its staff. He frequently met with CBS representatives, trying to negotiate solutions or assure them that future episodes would be less contentious. But each time, something else would set off a new wave of concern. A guest's performance, a line in a script, or a last-minute addition, every decision carried weight, and the margin for error had disappeared. By early 1969, the fragile alliance between CBS and the Smothers brothers was hanging by a thread. The network's executives were growing more impatient with each new episode. While they had tolerated a certain level of controversy before, they were no longer willing to let things slide. The situation was complicated further when it became clear that David Steinberg was returning for another sermonette. This one, insiders warned, would be even more direct and politically charged than his previous appearances. CBS had already told the show's producers that any future segments featuring Steinberg would be considered a serious breach of trust. Yet Tom decided to move forward with it anyway. He believed in what the segment had to say, and he refused to back down under pressure. The decision would mark the beginning of the end. This period of rising tension between artist and broadcaster, between satire and censorship, was about more than just one show. It reflected a larger cultural shift in America. As the country wrestled with issues of war, civil rights, and political leadership, television, too, was forced to confront its own role in shaping public discourse. The Smothers Brothers Comedy Hour stood at the center of that struggle, representing both the possibilities and the limitations of creative freedom in mainstream media. The battles being fought off-camera were just as significant as the ones that played out in the show's sketches, and as the conflict grew more intense, the outcome became increasingly uncertain. Would CBS find a way to contain the show without killing its spirit? Or would the growing pressure finally force the network to pull the plug altogether? The answer would come soon, and it would be definitive. By early 1969, the Smothers Brothers Comedy Hour had reached a critical tipping point. The tensions between the show's creative vision and CBS's network policies had grown too large to manage quietly. While the show was still pulling in strong numbers and maintained a devoted following, the atmosphere behind the scenes had become increasingly volatile. The battle lines were clear. On one side stood Tom Smothers and his team of writers and performers, determined to keep pushing boundaries and reflecting the social unrest of the times. On the other side stood CBS executives, under pressure from affiliates, sponsors, and political figures to rein in what was now seen as a disruptive and unpredictable program. The return of David Steinberg was the final spark. His previous appearances on the show had already drawn serious backlash, particularly for his satirical sermons that mixed religion with current events. These segments had been deemed offensive by several CBS affiliates, especially those in more conservative regions. In one case, more than 300 formal complaints were received within a week. CBS had responded by warning the show's producers that Steinberg's return would not be tolerated. Still, Tom Smothers chose to bring him back. The decision was not made lightly. Tom knew what was at stake. He understood the risks involved and the likelihood that this episode could lead to a confrontation with the network. But for him, the principle was more important than the consequences. He believed that the show's platform had to be used responsibly, that is, to challenge authority when necessary and to reflect the voices that were otherwise excluded from mainstream television. He felt that censoring Steinberg would be giving in to the very system they were trying to critique. The segment was filmed in early April 1969. It was staged simply, yet powerfully. The set resembled a church, complete with a pulpit and a spotlight. Steinberg, dressed in a rabbinical shawl, stepped forward and began a monologue that moved swiftly from biblical allegory to sharp political critique. He recounted the story of Moses, but instead of divine instruction, Moses was motivated by the conscience of young people, those who refused to fight in a war they believed was unjust. The audience laughed, applauded, and clearly understood the metaphor. The climax of the sermon was a line that CBS would later cite as the main source of concern. Steinberg delivered it directly. Moses looked straight at Pharaoh, sorry, Mr. President, and said, "Take your army and go. I will not help you any longer." The implication was clear. The Pharaoh in this updated parable was President Nixon. The army was America's military in Vietnam. The line called for disobedience, for protest, for action, and it did so on national television in front of millions of viewers. Following the sermon, a folk trio appeared, performing a song titled "No More Promised Lands." The lyrics referenced broken promises and urged young people to stop following false narratives. The segment closed with Steinberg tossing his shawl into the audience and shouting, "Peace, not war, preach it!" From a creative standpoint, it was powerful television, clever, provocative, and emotionally charged. But CBS executives saw it very differently. The episode was sent to the network as usual, but this time it was rejected outright. CBS claimed that the episode had missed its deadline for review, violating the show's contractual obligations. Tom Smothers and his team insisted that the tape had been submitted to Hollywood censors on time, as it had always been. They argued that the delay came from the New York headquarters, where the episode had been held up, reviewed with more scrutiny than usual, and ultimately shelved. Internally, the decision to block the episode had already been made. William Paley, then chairman of CBS, had grown increasingly frustrated with the show's defiance. After months of mounting pressure from both inside and outside the company, he concluded that the show was no longer worth the trouble. In a final meeting, CBS executives issued an ultimatum: remove Steinberg's performance entirely or face cancellation. Tom refused. On April 4, 1969, CBS terminated its contract with the Smothers Brothers Comedy Hour. There was no formal announcement to the public, no farewell episode, and no explanation aired on television. Viewers who tuned in the following week found that the show had been replaced by Hee Haw, a rural, themed comedy and variety program that posed no threat to network standards. For fans of the Smothers Brothers, it was a sudden and jarring disappearance. For the network, it was the end of a long and uncomfortable experiment. The unaired episode, however, did not vanish completely. CTV, a Canadian television network not subject to CBS censorship, aired the full episode in Canada. Bootleg recordings of the broadcast quickly made their way across the border. College students and independent video stores began sharing and distributing copies. Some campus groups held screenings, treating the episode as a symbol of free speech and creative resistance. Reactions to the cancellation were deeply divided. Among young people, especially those active in the anti-war and civil rights movements, the decision was viewed as censorship in its clearest form. They believed that CBS had bowed to political pressure and sacrificed artistic integrity for corporate comfort. Small protests were held outside local CBS offices in cities like San Francisco and Boston. Activist groups released statements condemning the network's actions, and college newspapers ran editorials praising the show's bravery. On the other side, many conservative organizations and family groups applauded the move. To them, the Smothers Brothers had crossed the line too many times. They believed the show had undermined American values, disrespected religion, and encouraged division during a time of national unrest. Some even argued that cancelling the show had protected the public from further exposure to dangerous ideas. For Tom and Dick Smothers, the cancellation was a devastating blow. Their careers took an immediate hit. Overnight, they went from hosting a highly rated national program to being virtually blacklisted from mainstream television. Networks considered them too risky, especially Tom, who had become the face of the show's political turn. Dick, though more moderate in tone, was still associated with the controversy. Offers dried up, and their presence on television all but disappeared. Despite the professional setback, the brothers remained close. They continued to perform together in live shows and theatre venues, maintaining a loyal fan base that admired their commitment. Behind the scenes, however, the strain was evident. The experience of fighting the network, dealing with the fallout, and being sidelined took a toll. In interviews years later, Dick would express regret that Tom had not been more flexible. He believed that a few compromises might have allowed the show to stay on the air longer, reaching more people and having a broader impact. At the same time, a quiet legal battle was unfolding. The Smothers Brothers sued CBS for breach of contract, arguing that the network's decision to cancel the show over alleged late deliveries was merely an excuse. They claimed that the true motivation had been content-based, that CBS wanted to silence the show due to political pressure and embarrassment. The lawsuit took nearly 4 years to resolve. In 1973, a court ruled in favor of the Smothers Brothers, ordering CBS to pay them more than $770,000, 0 cents, in damages. It was a legal win, but by then, the damage to their careers had been done. The cancellation of the Smothers Brothers Comedy Hour marked more than just the end of a television program. It represented a clash between two visions of what television could and should be. One side viewed TV as a business, responsible for maintaining public standards and pleasing a wide audience. The other side saw it as a cultural force, with the potential to challenge ideas and reflect the complexity of the time. The conflict between these visions played out in real time, with millions of viewers caught in the middle. What made the situation even more striking was the nature of the content that led to the cancellation. There was no profanity, no violence, no scandal in the traditional sense, just 5 minutes of satire, a song, and a symbolic performance. It wasn't vulgarity that CBS objected to, it was ideology. The fact that a national program could be cancelled over something so subtle but politically charged said a great deal about the limits of free expression on network television during that era. Looking back, it's clear that the Smothers Brothers paid a high price for standing their ground. But in doing so, they set a precedent. Their show became a case study in the risks and rewards of pushing boundaries, a reference point for future creators, and a symbol of how even comedy can carry serious consequences when it speaks too loudly. The aftershocks of their cancellation would continue to shape the industry for years to come. In the years following the cancellation of the Smothers Brothers Comedy Hour, the cultural impact of the show only grew. What had once been a controversial and divisive program became over time a symbol of creative defiance and a case study in how television can challenge authority and pay the price. Though the show was gone from the airwaves, its influence lived on in subtler ways, through the people it inspired, the questions it raised, and the conversations it continued to provoke. Tom and Dick Smothers, no longer hosting a nationally broadcast show, were left to pick up the pieces of their careers. Tom, in particular, was marked by the controversy. Many in the industry saw him as difficult, unpredictable, and too politically outspoken. He became a risk that most major networks and producers were unwilling to take. Despite his talent and reputation, he found few doors open to him in the years following the cancellation. 9 in the early days of the cancellation were found in the city, where they had for years been the misused of one of the... Dick, although less politically vocal, was also affected by the stigma of the show. The brothers remained close and continued performing live together, often drawing large crowds, especially among those who had followed the show during its original run. Their comedy set still included political material, but without the reach of television, their impact was limited to theatres and regional venues. Behind the scenes, their legal battle with CBS dragged on for nearly 4 years. The lawsuit accused the network of breaching its contract by cancelling the show on grounds of late delivery, which the brothers argued was a pretext for content-based censorship. In 1973, the court ruled in their favour, awarding them over $770,000, 0 cents in damages. Although the ruling provided some sense of justice, it didn't reopen the doors that had been closed. The networks had already moved on, and television had returned to safer, less politically charged content. Over time, though, perspectives began to shift. What was once considered dangerous and controversial came to be seen in a different light. Younger generations of comedians and writers, many of whom had grown up watching the show or hearing about it secondhand, began citing it as an inspiration. Figures like Lorne Michaels, the creator of Saturday Night Live, openly credited the Smothers Brothers for setting a precedent. Michaels said that without their show there might not have been an SNL. Their willingness to mix comedy with political critique had shown what was possible, even if it came at a high cost. The Smothers Brothers Comedy Hour came to represent a turning point in television history, a moment when the medium stepped beyond entertainment and into the realm of cultural and political influence. The show's use of satire, its commitment to topical material, and its refusal to back down in the face of censorship all contributed to its enduring reputation. It was one of the first shows to prove that comedy didn't have to avoid reality, it could instead be a direct response to it. The cancellation became a cultural reference point. Discussions about censorship in the media would often include the Smothers Brothers as an example of how power can shape what gets aired and what doesn't. In the decades that followed, segments of the show were taught in university courses on media studies, communication, and American history. Footage from the show began to appear in documentaries and retrospectives. It wasn't just a piece of entertainment history, it was treated as part of the broader story of free speech in America. Their place in history was formally recognized in later years. In 2008, Tom Smothers received an honorary Emmy, nearly 4 decades after the show had been taken off the air. During his acceptance speech, he reflected on the past with humility and grace, closing with a short but powerful line, "Peace is harder than war." The quote resonated widely and was picked up by various media outlets. It encapsulated not only the message of the show, but also the broader ethos of the era it came from. In 2010, both Tom and Dick Smothers were inducted into the Television Academy Hall of Fame. It was a belated but meaningful recognition of their contribution to the medium. By this point, attitudes had shifted enough that their defiance in the 1960s was no longer seen as reckless, but courageous. The television industry, having changed significantly since then, could now look back on the show as a pioneer, even if it had once viewed it as a problem. Outside of entertainment, the story of the Smothers Brothers became part of the political narrative as well. Both Tom and Dick were reportedly included on the Nixon administration's so-called enemies list, a roster of individuals and organizations the administration saw as threats. Although the list was mostly symbolic, their inclusion was seen as a badge of honor by some. It confirmed what many already suspected, that the show had genuinely unsettled those in power. Few other television programs could claim to have that kind of effect. In 2022, the full archives of the Smothers Brothers Comedy Hour, including unaired sketches, original scripts, production notes, and correspondence with CBS, were transferred to the University of California, Santa Barbara. This move opened up new opportunities for researchers, historians, and students to explore the inner workings of the show. It also helped preserve its legacy in a more formal and accessible way. Some of the materials included sketches that had been rejected by CBS, as well as handwritten notes from Tom and other writers, detailing their thought process and intent. The collection offered a rare behind-the-scenes look at the creative and logistical challenges involved in producing such a bold show during a politically charged time. The show's resurgence in the digital age has been both unexpected and revealing. With many old episodes digitized and uploaded online, clips have found a new life on platforms like YouTube, TikTok, and Reddit. Younger audiences, many of whom were not even born when the show originally aired, have begun to discover and share its content. Memes and parodies have emerged using famous lines from the show, such as "Mum always liked you best," or Pat Paulson's campaign slogans from Pat Paulson. Some clips, once considered too sensitive for broadcast, have now been viewed millions of times. This rediscovery is not just a wave of nostalgia. For many, it feels like a re-evaluation of a show that was ahead of its time. Its satire, though rooted in the politics of the 1960s, often still feels relevant. Issues around war, media, government accountability, and social justice continue to dominate public discourse, and the Smothers Brothers' approach to those issues through humour continues to resonate. The show's reappearance in public memory has even led to small exhibitions and screenings, including events where previously unaired segments like the Steinberg Sermonette were shown in full to modern audiences. In one such event at the New York Television Festival, excerpts from the so-called Forbidden Episode were shown in their entirety for the first time since 1969. The audience, made up largely of younger viewers and media students, reacted with surprise. The content, though decades old, still carried a sharpness and directness that few current television shows attempt. It prompted discussions not only about censorship and creativity, but also about the role of satire in a democratic society. Contemporary comedians and television hosts have not hesitated to acknowledge the show's influence. Figures like John Oliver, Stephen Colbert, Trevor Noah, and Hassan Minhaj have all mentioned the Smothers Brothers in interviews or during award ceremonies. They see the show not as an artifact of the past, but as part of a tradition, a lineage of performers using comedy to comment on society, challenge norms, and provoke thought. What makes the Smothers Brothers stand out in that tradition is how early they did it and how much they sacrificed to make it happen. The legacy of the show is no longer in doubt. It is recognized as one of the most daring and consequential programs in American television history. While it may not have lasted long, its impact far exceeded its runtime. It showed that comedy could be more than a distraction. It could be a form of expression, resistance, and even leadership. The Smothers Brothers Comedy Hour didn't set out to be a cultural landmark, but in refusing to stay silent, it became one. Now, decades later, its story continues to be told, not just through reruns and awards, but through the voices it helped inspire and the doors it helped open. In classrooms, in documentaries, in comedy clubs, and in digital archives, the echoes of what Tom and Dick created still ring out. Their journey serves as a reminder of what can happen when entertainment chooses to reflect reality, and what it costs when powerful institutions decide that reflection is too uncomfortable to allow.